Well, the inflation rate has gone down. Breaking news. It's now 2.9%, down all the way from 9% in record time, actually, that we've gotten there. Well, you know why that is? A lot of people say, oh, well, maybe Biden did all the right things, etc. Actually, that is not the complete story. The complete story is exactly what we said earlier on. This was not an inflation rate. This was a corporate greed rate, not an inflation rate, a corporate greed rate. And that's the reason it could fall quickly, because we were not talking about shortage. But anyway, I want you to listen to the report, and then we'll take it on the other side.
Breaking economic news this morning. Inflation is dropping, coming in at 2.9% for July. We're talking about the prices you pay. It's the first time that inflation number has fallen below 3% in more than 3 years. Let's get right to NBC News business and data correspondent Brian Chung. Okay, eggs, rent, gas, break it all down for us.
Yeah, and again, we haven't seen a number this low since March of 2021. But look, the big takeaway here is that prices are still going up in America, but they're going up by a slower pace than we had seen in the prior months. So again, July 2024 compared to July 2023, these are yearly figures, 2.9%. That's how much prices rose over that 1 year period. That's a slower pace than the 3% inflation we had seen in the June to June period. So again, let's take a look at that yearly rate of inflation on this chart. And you can see that, look, we've made vast improvements from the over 9% inflation rate that we had seen in the summer of 2022. Yes, we've been coming down, and it is indeed the case. We've kind of been going sideways, hovering around this 3% inflation rate for a little while, which is the reason why it makes it so significant that we broke through to that 2.9% figure this morning. Now, when you unpack the report, where did we see the changes in prices? Because again, this consumer price index, it's a measure of everything that we purchase on a regular basis. So food prices did increase. These are monthly figures that I'm showing you now, 0.2% between June and July, same pace as we saw in the May to June period. Energy prices really helped us out here. Gasoline prices actually declining between June and July. Energy broadly, when you include other things like natural gas, basically going sideways between June and July. But the one point of concern that we still have is housing costs. This is the largest expenditure for most Americans. It actually increased between June and July. So housing prices increasing by 0.4% between June and July. This, by the way, accounted for 90% of the increase in the overall inflation index. We're going to have to continue to watch that if you want to see that other inflation headline number come down. Analysts that are reacting to this report are basically saying this solidifies and guarantees essentially a Federal Reserve interest rate cut in their next meeting, which will happen in the middle of September. The story here is really going to be, all right, well, the Federal Reserve is looking at what's been happening with not just inflation, but the fact that wage growth also has increased as well. 3.6% is the yearly pace of wage increases. That is above the pace of inflation of 2.9%. The Federal Reserve, the nation's central bank, saying, all right, we've held interest rates so high for quite a while. That's the reason why your mortgage rates and your credit card rates are high, but it appears to be a good dynamic with people making more than prices are going up at the store. We'll have to see if the Fed does cut.
All right. You know, it is very disconcerting to me how the media puts out this information. It's like, oh, we are happy. The inflation rate is down. Of course, housing is still high, etc. The corporations are still ripping us off. So what I want to do is I want you to listen. I want you to listen to a piece that I did, I think either yesterday or the day before, on what really caused inflation. Inflation had nothing to do with Biden. It had everything to do with the failure, not the failure, because they knew exactly what they were doing. It had everything to do with corporate greed and what the corporations put on the people. The corporation raped the American citizenry. I want you to listen to this, and then we'll take it on the other side. Those prices in the grocery stores are caused directly by corporate greed. Let me tell you again, all, not some, all of inflation. I'm going a bit further than our friend in Congress who claimed that it's only about, I think it was like 50% of inflation was caused by corporate greed. I am telling you, categorically, 100% of inflation was caused by corporate greed. And for those who are first tuning in today to my program, let me explain. There were several factors that caused inflation. The one that they like to talk about the most is supply chain, meaning we had a lot of shortages because of the supply chain coming from overseas. Number two, they like to claim that it was caused also by the oil crisis caused by not drilling enough in America, as well as the war in Ukraine. And three, they want to say it was Biden throwing too much money into the economy. I can debunk absolutely every single one of those items from a standard economic point of view. In other words, this isn't thinking out of the box. This is thinking out of how our economic system works today. I would like to change the way our economic system works. An economic system isn't divine. It is man-made. It is human-made. So we can change it. But under the current tenets of our economic system, all of inflation was caused by the private sector, by the corporate state. Here, first, let's start with the challenges caused by the supply chain. The only reason we had a supply chain to the problem to the extent of that we had it to create problems is because corporate greed said, we're not going to make cloth and textiles in the Carolinas anymore. We're going to send it off overseas. We're not going to create a lot of our products in America. We're going to send it off to China, Vietnam, and elsewhere. So therefore, we are going to ship a lot of our demand, what fulfill our demands overseas. By doing that, it means that we are very dependent on export or on imports, meaning we are very dependent on transportation. How do you get transportation? Through ships bringing containers into America. Now, when you have that lag in manufacture, shipping, and then going into the store, you must create something called inventory. Huge inventory to cover what? You should create inventories to cover the potential or possibility of hurricanes, the possibility of ships sinking, the possibilities of hurricanes beating up on ships, the possibility of pandemics, the possibility of strikes in the overseas areas where you're manufacturing. All of that dictates having to create large storage areas locally to prevent shocks to the system. But you know what? In order to get money themselves and not pay the Americans an American living wage, they created these offshore items. It's not the only thing that they did. They also started a process called just-in-time inventory. When everything works good, the executives look like geniuses. Right? Because if as soon as something is manufactured in Korea, it goes on a container ship, gets to the container yard in LA, and it leaves the container yard in LA on a trail and gets to the Walmart or gets to all these other places, works perfectly. You don't have to pay for inventory. You don't have to pay storage. You don't have to pay any of those things. But again, because of the greed, the evil of these executives, just-in-time inventory, along with offshoring, created the supply chain problem. And then who do they ask to pay for that? They ask us to pay the inflated prices for their screw-up. So who caused that part of the inflation? The corporate sector. Número dos, they said, the oil because of the war in Ukraine, created a shock to the market. Biggest lie that there is. We never had a shortage of petroleum. You could always go to the gas station and buy gas, whether the price was high or not. They knew they could keep the price high, but I'm going to talk about why they could keep the price high after this here. But anyway, it was always a lie. America is drilling more today than under Trump or under any other president. We are the largest creator of oil, bar none. America is. The United States of America, that is. Okay? Now, the parts where the war was in Russia, in Ukraine, had nothing to do with the oil fields in Russia. Russia, even with sanctions, could still ship its oil. In fact, the sanctions of Russians should have reduced the price of oil. Why? Because China and India was buying oil from Russia at a discount because of the sanctions. But let's go a bit further. If China and Russia are buying oil on the Russian market at a discount, that means there's more oil on the Western market because China and India are buying less. And guess how we know that it's a fact that there was less oil that they bought less oil and there was more oil on the market. Guess what? In the middle of these high prices, in the middle of this pandemic, guess what Saudi Arabia did? Saudi Arabia said, oh, the price, that there is a glut of oil in the market, not a shortage, a glut. So what are we going to do in Saudi Arabia? We are going to take away 2 million barrels of oil a day. They gave Biden hell because Biden said, okay, you guys are going to play with the market now. So what I have is something called a strategic reserve. I am to protect America with this strategic reserve. So I'm going to open that damn reserve up and throw oil onto the market. And then that kind of mitigates. And people say, well, he got about 40 or 50 days worth of oil. And if he does it right, he can really kind of mess with our stuff. But that oil price rise was corporate greed, not shortage. But guess what? Once you raise the price of oil, farming get more expensive, trucking gets more expensive. All these things dependent on oil gets more expensive. As they get more expensive, those prices go on to the product you buy. And of course, Walmart didn't just put the extra price on. They tagged another little piece onto it. Corporate greed. The prices went up higher than their costs that they were giving all this free money to the oil companies. And the third part why inflation was allowed to fester was because of the stimulus. Biden threw a lot of money to prevent people from starving, put a lot of money to prevent people from feeling the pain of a mal-done pandemic that Trump allowed to occur. Had Trump stopped the pandemic by not making believe it's just the flu, it would have been a lot less worse than it was then. Now, so because the corporations knew that Americans had extra money in their pockets and that they were no longer spending that money on restaurants, etc., it means there are certain things they could raise their prices on because they knew Americans would still buy it. Why? Because they had money in their pockets. And as the tenet of capitalism says, it's very simple. Whatever the market will bear. It's an evil system. If you have money and we know you have money and we have a product that we know you want or must have, we can put the price as high as you are willing to pay or as you have money for said price. Again, folks, 100% of inflation was caused by corporate greed. Do not allow the narrative from the mainstream media. Do not allow the narrative from neoliberal economists from telling you otherwise. And by the way, I validated this entire narrative with several economists who are willing to go on the line and say, Brother Willies, you are right. Okay? So these are statements of fact. They are quantifiable and verifiable. Absolutely everything that I just told you about inflation. So yes, let's be very, very clear. Inflation is down. It should really disappear. And to put it better, it's not inflation, it's corporate greed.
We spend a lot of time deconstructing the news, trying to parse it into a form that everybody can understand. We try to find those little nitpicks where it flies above the fray, etc. If you really like these videos that we do, I want to ask a big favor. Please go ahead. Number 1, subscribe to our channel. And number 2, please join if you can. Thank you so kindly for watching. Keep watching. Please remember to share. We must populate the entire internet with our progressive message, a message that we know is what most Americans say that they want. So help us, please join.